poltergeist is a citizen of the world. We find poltergeists in all cultures, in all times, in all periods. So when I was writing What is a Poltergeist, what I wanted to do was take a global perspective, draw in cases from a wide variety of places and seeing what their similarities and differences were. Now, in many respects, we actually have a sort of what you might call a reporting bias, because we don't know of many poltergeist cases in China, for example. It's the most populous country in the world, but we don't hear about many poltergeists. I'm sure there are, we simply don't hear about them. The majority of cases we do hear about, and the majority of cases that I focused on, tend to be in North America. And that's because we've got a wide variety of people who are very interested in these things, and we've got a literate culture that likes to investigate poltergeist cases. And so from the very earliest days, from the 17th century right through to the present day, we have a large number of cases, particularly in the USA, of poltergeists. And some of them reveal some really interesting things. A lot of early poltergeists seem to me to be a protest against the dullness, the boredom of agricultural labour. Because large numbers of poltergeists in, say, the 19th and early 20th century are on farms. They're not in the cities, they're on farms. And they can be very, very destructive, and it's almost as if someone on the farm is acting out their frustrations. Punk rock hadn't been invented, so the kids on the farms, they had to do something else, and so perhaps they manifested their dismay, their frustration in ways in poltergeists. And that's a really interesting thing. Now, in modern times, poltergeist has moved. The poltergeist has moved to council houses, to municipal housing, to flats, to suburban places, to army bases, to tower blocks. That's where we find poltergeists these days. Poltergeists occur where people live. That's the key thing. You don't find poltergeists in barely inhabited areas. What you do, you find poltergeists in urban areas, in cities, and not always, but in many cases, they are associated with people under some kind of stress. And I'll give you an example. In 1999, there was a case from Florida. It's a very extraordinary case. Poltergeists like, it seems, to play with things. You find poltergeists playing with fire, with dirt and filth and all that sort of thing. Some of them use blood or animal parts. This particular poltergeist liked water. The family, who were quite well off, lived in a large house, was frequently sprinkled with water that was falling from the ceiling, and then that graduated to water being thrown at them. And at one point, they actually fled the house as several gallons of water were thrown at them. The poltergeist liked water. Now, the family, when they were investigated, they were actually investigated by someone hired by the insurance company, because they made an insurance claim about the water damage. And the family were clearly under great stress. On the surface, they looked like the perfect American family, but in fact, underneath things were bubbling and very dark. The grandmother in the house, for example, she believed that the poltergeist was a spirit from her past. Something that she'd done in the past, some sin she'd committed in the past, was actually coming to haunt her these days. Meanwhile, skipping a generation, the 12-year-old girl in the house was absolutely convinced that she was haunted because she and her friends had been playing with a Ouija board a few weeks before. They'd invited some dead celebrities to come and haunt them, and now there was a poltergeist in their house throwing things around. Now, that particular 12-year-old was a very disturbed individual. She had major behavioural problems, which in her later life manifested into petty crime and that sort of thing. But at the same time, the investigator found that there seemed to be an electromagnetic field that was in place as well. So he was wondering whether or not it was a mix between sort of the environmental forces and the psychological forces that were, the stresses that were at play in the household. And that kind of pattern does seem to me to be repeated in other countries. We find examples in Brazil, in Argentina, in Holland, France, Germany, Britain, Australia. We find these kind of patterns repeated, and that, I think, is absolutely fascinating, because if the poltergeist is a citizen of the world, poltergeist is with us wherever and whenever we are.